clinical psychiatrist, and me, your co-host. And for those of you who saw last week's show, if you're interested, we also have an article published on it. Dr. Portino has an article published concerning the Tyree Nichols case and Latino Rebels, which is an online periodical for the Hispanic audience. And today we're going to talk about something that is kind of timely based on what's going on in the news and the like, especially this latest thing with the Chinese balloon and all sorts of stuff in our elections. And that's conspiracy theories and really the psychology behind it. I mean, why do those even exist?
Oh my God! I mean, welcome everybody. I'm actually speaking from home today, not from my office. And thank you for helping me edit that piece to LatinoRebels.com, which I think is kind of an interesting article. Is planting some seeds, some ideas in terms of not the why as much as the how to. Right? How do we go about dealing with this so we can decrease intensity and frequency of these events and facilitate recovery if we want to use a recovery model. But let's talk about conspiracies. And the last 6 7 years have been fascinating in that conspiracies have become how can I say it, more prevalent, more intense, and more devious. Devious
Almost,
in the in the
almost par for the course, actually.
well, devious in the context that um, we as humans have always developed some ability to develop some conspiracies as a way of protecting ourselves, especially with information overload. But information overload is not the exception, is the rule now. So, in order for us to understand and process stuff, we have to think about it, right? So, we have to think about possibilities. And if you think about us humans at the beginning of our development, you would recognize that people had to figure out what to do with new information, right? I mean, there are famous conspiracy theories like the Kennedy assassination, most recently the balloon from China, and there's some veracity to some of the data and some that is totally irrational, and people will play with that information as a way to feel themselves in control, right?
Mm.
The problem is that we have gotten devious about the use of conspiracy theories, particularly in politics, in which, with the movement of information going so fast, you start by just throwing a hook out there in any of the social media platforms, and then you just run with it, right? And people will run with it in a lot of different directions. Unfortunately, politicians get devious with it. They get devious in the context of utilizing it to manipulate masses, right? If you believe what I say, you believe my conspiracy, you are with me, and then we can recognize who the enemy is, so we can fight against it together, right? Uh, and if you really think about it, when you look at January 6, 2021, when we had the big incursion into the Congress by the mob, let's call it the mob, that was not something that happened that day. That was happening that was fed and purposely perpetrated by a bunch of conspiracy theories, right? I mean, from having lost the election to QAnon to we're being invaded by other countries and so on. And that takes a life of its own. And unfortunately, what happens with conspiracy theories is that the consequences can be pretty serious.
Yeah, an incursion like that does not just happen spontaneously. That's planned. It's organized. There's support. You mentioned it being used in a devious manner in a previous show. We discussed the difference between misinformation, which could be just improper information, and disinformation, which is the use of information and misinformation to a nefarious end. Are a lot of these conspiracy theorists doing that, or do you think it's just again, psychology of some paranoia, narcissism, desire to be right, or is there more of a nefarious reason behind all these?
Well, here's the problem with conspiracy theories is that a theory is something that we believe may exist, right? But conspiracies do exist. There
Mm,
are people that conspire. I mean, governments conspire against other governments conspire against their own people. So the conspiracies do exist, but they're rare, right? So when you make it a theory, you collect a number of facts and you put them together, and then you basically create an alternative reality. Okay. So what you believe initially was a conspiracy gets fed by a lot of non-real stuff, right? And then people believe the non-real stuff. And then depending on the basic human needs of each person in society, you may choose to eliminate the irrational facts or not, right?
mm,
So most people who are well balanced will look at these things and say, maybe, maybe not, but most likely not because A, B, C, and D, right? So, and I don't want to sound too professionally narcissistic, okay? But there's a direct relation between your educational level
mm,
and your tendency to believe conspiracy theories. There is a close connection with certain personality patterns that we know that these personality patterns get very close to irrationality. For example, narcissism, schizotypal personality, schizoid personality, paranoid personality. So those personalities have to grab into something to create their own reality, right? And they become very defensive when you attack it. So the issue, kind of an easy way to recognize conspiracy theories is how hard the person has to defend it,
mm.
right? Because if you are well grounded on the facts, you don't have to defend things too emotionally and you don't have to argue the facts, right? So what happens is that in the ultimate conspiracy theory cult, because we also have cults of conspiracy theory, QAnon was one of those, you know, fed by a person who was sending information and creating all these ideas, the pedophiles and the world order and all of these people were and ended up eating children, right? I mean, a guy ended up walking into a restaurant with a rifle, wanting to kill
Mhm.
people, looking for people to kill because they were eating children. I mean, that's when you get into this psychotic, delusional stuff, right? So when you get into the cult, what happens is the cult gets closed up, meaning you cannot even reach people in the cult to have a conversation
Mm.
because this kind of delusional irrationality where you're not going to let anybody question your beliefs because now they're grounded. Now, there is a fine line between cultism and conspiracy theories. They're two different things, but there's a connection between those two. It's not that difficult for a conspiracy theory to go into a cult, right? So, our need for certainty when you have certain issues in terms of how you manage information, how trusting you are, how sensitive you are to rejection and criticism, how much you need attention and recognition from other people, and you start getting into certain personality traits and characters, then you end up with a situation where that can grow and people become defensive, right?
You know,
And there are people who are more vulnerable to that.
you mentioned before that a lot of the thing with the conspiracy theories is they actually string together real facts with kind of a delusional connection, and that makes it harder to to fight against. But I'm looking actually at an article on my phone that you sent from Psych Central, talking about the different character traits of these people. Tend to be paranoid or suspicious thinking, eccentricity, low trust in others, a stronger need to feel special, which you've mentioned, the belief that a world is a dangerous place, and some meaning and patterns that don't exist. But you used a word a minute ago, schizopty. Excuse me, I can't even pronounce it. What is that?
It's schizotypy
Schizotype.
is a form of personality disorder. We call it schizotypal personality disorder, and is more frequent in certain people. But these are people that have a lot of magical thinking, right?
Mm,
So their conspiracy theories are not necessarily all into negativity. They can have conspiracy theories on how the world is going to get fixed, okay, because of some irrational things. Now, in general, conspiracy theories are much more frequent in situations where things are negative, right?
mm,
Somebody dies, somebody's trying to take over government, the government is trying to control you. You very seldom hear conspiracy theories about goodness, right?
mm.
uh, I mean, I haven't heard a lot of um, conspiracy theories about all the positivity that occurred over the last 25 years, right? Or how many less people are poor in the world today compared to 1975, right? So, uh, how little we hear about people not having anything to eat compared to back in the 60s and 70s, you know? So, there are a lot of good things that have happened in the world, right? But there is a tendency that when we become restrictive with communication and interaction, right? Dialogue, let's call it, that there's a tendency to develop more conspiracy theories.
Mm.
Actually, the advent of communism in the early 1900s, right, up until the Chinese Revolution and the Stalinism and all the changes in the Soviet Union until the end of communism with the opening of Russia, during those times, there were a lot of conspiracy theories about that. So the more restrictive you get politically, the higher the level of conspiracies too. So it's not just an issue of personality, like schizotypal magical thinking, or schizoids that are very retractive, or people who are paranoid that question everything and they're always very defensive, or narcissistics that have a tremendous need to feel special and recognized. Um, but in the sociological sphere, there's also a lot of risk. And I think that the more restrictive societies are, the higher the level of conspiracy theories.
Well, again, looking at this article, they talk about the type of people or the tendencies to believe theories are folks obviously with narcissistic tendencies, low agreeableness, people who are not so open to experience. But also mentioned Machiavellianism. How does that play into it?
I mean, I don't want to get too deep into history, but Machiavelli was a master manipulator, um, and somebody who was very good at creating discord by creating conspiracy theories, right? So he will manipulate um, information. And we're talking about hundreds of years ago
Mhm.
when the information wasn't moving as fast. But when we talk about Machiavellic, what we're talking about is that there's a significant secondary gain for you or the people you represent, right? And there is actually, you can take it one step higher and say that there is a lot of pleasure on doing it.
Hmm.
So it's pleasurable and it has secondary gain and it's purposeful. So we have people, and that's where you get into politics, right? I mean, and is it goes closely associated with cynicism, right? So Machiavellism requires some degree of cynicism, right? That's why I always like to say that cynicism is not is not a tool. It's not something that we should be using to obtain anything. Because is cynicism is not only gaslighting people, but denigrating people and making them feel ashamed, right? By using sarcasm in combination with conspiracy theories. So cynicism is a very destructive um, tool, if you may, when it comes to conspiracy theories. Because basically, when groups get close, they become cynic about it, right?
Mhm.
So everybody outside of the group of the conspiracy theory is stupid.
It's funny you say that. That's what I hear a lot when you question their conspiracy theories. Oh, you're just stupid or this. And I find it interesting because you mentioned the level of education and the like. And some of the people I've chatted with don't really have the highest level of education. Don't understand critical thinking, Occam's razor. Um, I saw a guy post something today about insisting that his country nationalize their energy grid, but this is a guy who, for months, has posted against socialism, uh, which is if you understand the definition of socialism and economic system, it's the ownership of the factors of production. So essentially, he's pushing toward toward the one
Give me
thing
a
he said
second
he doesn't
here.
want to do.
Somebody's calling me. Sorry. Go ahead.
No worries. And I just find it interesting. So, what's the way to battle this when you have people who insist on accepting things that just don't make sense to us, to more critical thinking people or educated people, but to them is gospel? How do you work with that? Did I lose you?
Yeah, you lost me just for a minute. Can you ask me a question again?
Yeah, so if you have people who, again, who don't have additional education, who don't understand critical thinking, um, and we all have friends that absolutely 100% believe A, Y, and Z. How do you manage that in an interpersonal relationship with someone?
Well, there's two sides to the question. I was listening to the first part of what you were talking about, and we need to understand that there's not one trait in any human being that predicts your tendency to be vulnerable to conspiracy theories or cults. However, the imbalance of some of those features, right? Your temperament, your personality, your biology, your social status, your intelligence, your cognitive abilities have to be balanced so you can take pieces of all of that as a way of managing reality. At the end of the day, what we're trying to understand is what I'm living real, is what I'm thinking real, and what purpose does it serve, right? So there are people who are very intelligent, they're very vulnerable to conspiracy theories because they're very narcissistic or they're very empty inside or they're schizotypal because they have mental illness and they're schizophrenic. Okay. You don't have to be dumb or intellectually limited because you have schizophrenia. To the
Mm.
contrary, or you can be tremendously intelligent. You have bipolar disorder and you have a tendency towards psychosis. You don't have to be dumb or intelligent or poorly intelligent because you have narcissistic personality. So, is the balance of your biology, your psychology, and your sociology that needs to be taken into account when we consider, right, who's vulnerable and who is entrenched in that. So, we had to know the people that we're dealing with, right? And we had to make sure that we don't poke at them, right? So what I said before in terms of people who believe conspiracy theories and they're entrenched on them is that the worst thing you can do is to try to shame them because they believe what they believe. So that's where neutrality becomes terribly important. The second part is to have um, understanding and good listening, right? And not challenge, but always end up the conversation with recognizing that they can have a dialogue with you and you don't have to be convinced, right? Now, when the convincing effort becomes very intense, what usually happens is that the insecurity of the cult is so high that they need to bring you to their side. You need to be part of it
Mm.
to be able to communicate. You control your choices of who you talk to and who you relate with, and they control theirs. Most of the time, we're always trying to figure out how do we keep them close, right? And you keeping them close is not your choice; it's their choice.
Mm.
You only have the choice of being empathic, understanding, listening carefully, be available if they want to talk to you, but they may never want to talk to you again. Okay. If your goal in the interaction is to not lose them as friends, you don't have control over that. But you have control of how receptive you are. You have control over how you listen. You have control over your ability to be willing to be there for them if they need to or if they want to. But the other side, you don't control. And sometimes we we feel too much of a responsibility to keep them close, right? Now it's a little different with your family because you don't have a choice with your family. They're your family, right? But you still don't have the choice of deciding for them,
Mm.
but you have the choice of deciding for you. And things have gotten pretty intense in the last 5 or 6 years in terms of family interactions. And you have lived that. I have lived that, right? And people at work and people that we've known for years and years who started going a little too far. Now, the good news is that I'm starting to see a lot of those people coming back.
Me too.
Okay? But they come back only if you are willing to be there, okay, and to not be critical of they having strayed away into areas that were questionably rational, I have to say.
Well, it sounds like once again we're back to empathetic listening, non-judgment, and be there for people if they want to be without making them pay the price. Well,
That is
Doctor,
true.
appreciate the information about conspiracy theories, the psychology of it, and how we can deal with our friends and family that may be part of it. Everybody, thank you for listening again. Like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next week.
Thank you very much to everybody. We'll see you soon. Thank you.